Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, all of you, to American Islamic College, and for those of you joining online. Steeped in Islamic values of creational stewardship and justice, all of us at American Islamic College believe that God has entrusted the land and waters He created to humankind, who were created to serve God and the creation as stewards or caretakers. We also believe that we must stand for justice even when we ourselves may be implicated. So we want to begin today by acknowledging that our campus sits on land that was originally entrusted to the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, peoples whose sovereignty, culture, and very lives were violated by colonial policy. Welcoming students of all faiths and backgrounds, American Islamic College is an accredited institution of higher learning, grounded in Islamic values and steeped in Islam's rich and diverse intellectual and cultural traditions. We promote an appreciation for the scope and richness of Islamic history and civilization in the classroom and beyond through impactful teaching and informative public events such as these, highlighting Islam's intellectual, artistic, and cultural expressions. Through rigorous scholarship and a commitment to social justice, the collective good, civic involvement, interfaith understanding, and intercultural engagement, AIC prepares students to become critical thinkers, visionary leaders, and responsible global citizens. Our spring term is coming to a close. In fact, we have our graduation ceremony, inshallah, tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. with Alia Bilal, the Executive Director of Iman, who will serve as our keynote speaker, and Dr. Tipu Siddiqui, who will be receiving an honorary doctorate. So please join us if you can. Juma's at 1, and then graduation is at 2:30, inshallah. I also invite you to take a look at our summer course lineup. In addition to the Arabic Language Institute, which offers Arabic courses in modern speaking and classical Quranic Arabic, we have a list of unique and exciting enrichment courses that you can take for fun or for credit. We also have certificates in Islamic teaching and education with Mr. Habib Qadri and Leila Shatara. Please check them out. I think they're at your seats. So now, without further ado, I would like to invite and introduce Dr. Omer Awass, who is an Associate Professor of Arabic and Islamic Studies at American Islamic College. His current research interests center on religion, modernity, and globalization. He has been conducting field research on contemporary fatwas across the Muslim world to address how they are negotiating their post-colonial realities. His book, Fatwa and Making the Renewal of Islamic Law, is published by Cambridge. Dr. Awass is serving as our moderator for the evening. Please give him a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramana. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to welcome our audience to the American Islamic College and also welcome Dr. Kholoud Al-Ajarma to our college. Again, in the audience online as well, welcome you to one of our series of lectures that we have at the American Islamic College of different topics and different speakers. And so we're honored today to have Dr. Kholoud Al-Ajarma, who is Al-Walid Lecturer in Globalized Muslim World and Deputy Director of Al-Walid Center for the Study of Islam in the Contemporary World. Dr. Kholoud holds a PhD in Anthropology and Comparative Study of Religion from the University of Groningen in Netherlands. Her PhD thesis focused on socio-cultural embeddedness of Muslim pilgrimage or Hajj in Moroccan everyday life. Her current research focus on water resource management and contemporary environment concerns in the Muslim world. In addition to her academic experience in anthropology and religion, Dr. Kholoud has worked in the fields of refugee studies, gender, youth development, migration, human rights, and environmental justice in several countries of the Mediterranean region, including Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, and Morocco. Dr. Kholoud is also an award-winning photographer and filmmaker who has extensive experience developing and leading programs and projects among refugee communities, including innovative platforms for human rights research, and media production among youth refugees. And she is here to speak about her recently published book, Mecca in Morocco, Articulation of Muslim Pilgrimage in Moroccan Everyday Life. I'd like to welcome Dr. Kholoud Al-Ajarma here.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone for being here and the audience online as well. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Omer and Romana. We've exchanged emails back and forth to make this happen. So thank you very much, and I'm very glad to be amongst you today. So my presentation will focus on some of the findings of my book, but allow me to start a bit earlier with my first memories of the Hajj. My first memory of the Muslim pilgrimage, the Hajj, dates back to 1994, when I was a child growing up in Bethlehem, Palestine. That year, my parents undertook the pilgrimage, traveling by land from Palestine through Jordan to Saudi Arabia. While I was too young to fully grasp the spiritual significance of their journey, I vividly recall the excitement that surrounded their return. The walls outside our home have been freshly painted with a mural of the Kaaba, and the names of my parents and branches of olive and palm were placed by the doorway, a symbolic gesture of welcome. Friends, neighbors, and relatives flooded our home to greet my parents and to honor their return as Hujjaj, pilgrims. Their return was met with a deep recognition and acknowledgement that they had fulfilled one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Over shared meals, stories from Mecca and Medina were recounted, reinforcing a collective spiritual memory. The pilgrimage was not simply an individual act of worship, it was a moment of social and religious transformation, a source of pride and reaffirmation of faith. As a child, the most tangible aspect of the pilgrimage for me was the array of gifts that they brought back. 8 large suitcases filled with dates from Medina, prayer mats, scarves, embroidered scarves and textiles, and nearly 40 liters of Zamzam water carefully distributed among family and friends. I received a beautifully embroidered dress, a gift that I understood as part of a much larger cultural exchange practice. The exchange of these objects was means of extending barakah, the spiritual blessing of the Hajj, to those who could not undertake the journey themselves. This early exchange and encounter with the Hajj shaped my understanding of pilgrimage as a lived sensory experience, one that permeates the fabric of everyday life across the Muslim world and resonates far beyond the geographical boundaries of Mecca. Therefore, Mecca in Morocco emerges from an inquiry into how pilgrimage is not only undertaken, but also experienced, remembered, and imagined within Moroccan society. Rather than viewing the Hajj as a ritual confined to Mecca, this research investigates its befores and afterlives, examining how it shapes personal, social, and national identities, material exchanges, and religious imaginaries long after the pilgrimage have ended. The book itself is structured into 10 chapters, beginning with theological or theoretical debates in pilgrimage studies and anthropology of Islam, followed by methodological considerations. And the remaining 9 chapters are divided into 3 thematic sections, each exploring different dimensions of the pilgrimage. Rather than attempting to cover all of them here, I will cover a brief glimpse into some of the debates presented in the book. The anthropology of pilgrimage has long been dominated by studies of Christian pilgrimage and Christian pilgrimage sites, often focusing on the pilgrimage center, the sacred destination, as the primary site of religious transformation. Within this framework, pilgrimage is viewed as a liminal space, a temporary removal from the structure of everyday life, going away and allowing for a heightened spiritual and social experience. If we apply this perspective to the Hajj, we see how Hajj fits into this framework. The pilgrimage rituals, the sites that the pilgrims visit, and the deeply personal encounters at the holy sites and the holy places are central to the experience. For many, the Hajj is a journey of a lifetime. It is the answer of God's call, the adhan, and the completion of the 5th pillar of Islam. When I asked Moroccan pilgrims about their experience, the first response that I often received was, and I quote, "You have to experience the pilgrimage to truly understand. It is a journey beyond words." Many pilgrims describe being overwhelmed upon seeing the Kaaba for the first time, for example, with tears streaming down their faces as they grasp the magnitude of that moment. Others spoke of, for example, the awe that they felt standing on the plain of Arafat, surrounded by millions of fellow Muslims, immersed in the sacred rituals of the Hajj. In chapter 3, I discuss these emotional and very heightened responses, which underscores the sensory dimensions of the pilgrimage, where seeing, listening, touching, smelling, and tasting become integral into how pilgrims narrate and make sense of their pilgrimage experience. A particularly significant aspect of the Hajj is the experience of belonging to the Ummah, the global Muslim community. This collective solidarity is perhaps most tangible during the pilgrimage. This heightened sense of solidarity and shared purpose among the pilgrims is often referred to in pilgrimage studies as communitas, a concept coined by Victor Turner, which conceptualizes pilgrimage as a liminal process that suspends social hierarchies and boundaries and allowing the emergence of unity among the pilgrims. Moroccan pilgrims often speak about meeting other Muslims in Mecca, interactions that are profoundly meaningful. For example, Hassan, a pilgrim from Safi, told me how he cherished the opportunity to meet Muslims from across the world. He recognized and recorded short messages from pilgrims in Levantine Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, Urdu, Basa Indonesia, Hindi, and Turkish, sending them back to his home and sending them back online to his family. He also shared meals with Muslims from Syria, Palestine, Malaysia, Belgium, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, describing how, in a literal sense, he was tasting the global Muslim community. At the same time, he learned about the traditions and cultures of other Muslims, which ones he liked, which ones were extremely novel, and he also saw in himself an ambassador of Morocco among 2.5 million Muslims, embodying its identity with a sense of national pride and responsibility to demonstrate its identity and exemplary behavior among the other Muslims. I discussed these roles and responsibilities in detail in chapter 5, including how the state responds to the Hajj and how it paints the Hajj as part of this national Moroccan identity. But beyond the feelings of unity, harmony, and awe that pilgrims always talk about, pilgrimage is not without its complexities. Alongside the expressions of solidarity, tensions and conflicts also arise within pilgrimage spaces. Contestation, therefore, emerges in various forms, from logistical challenges, which are addressed in chapter 2, to broader political and economic issues, including issues with, for example, how the Moroccan state and how the Saudi state manage the Hajj. Overall, the book seeks to go beyond the act of pilgrimage itself to examine the broader personal journey that transforms those who perform the Hajj, particularly how the Hajj manifests in their everyday lives, and how pilgrims engage in processes of ethical self-formation while also encountering setbacks, doubt, and ambivalence in their everyday life. Chapter 4, for instance, looks at the daily lives of pilgrims after their return from Mecca, tracing their efforts to engage the pilgrimage experience into their everyday lives. These are just some pictures of and examples of the contestation paradigm. So upon completing the Hajj, pilgrims believe that they are cleansed from their sins and are bestowed with honorary titles, Hajj for a man and Hajja for a woman. These titles carry social prestige, but also impose religious and ethical expectations. The way pilgrims strive to embody their new status, often alternating between aspirations of perfection and the pressures and realities of everyday existence, we can say the struggle between staying on the right path and straying from it. One case that illustrates this dynamic is that of Abu Bakr, a teacher from Muhammadiyah who performed the Hajj in 2014 after his wife Najla registered him in the national lottery system that determines who can go on the pilgrimage. Recalling his departure, Najla described an emotionally charged farewell. And she says, I quote, before he left to Mecca at the airport, he cried and asked for forgiveness for every moment of anger and every unjust action during our life together. I felt like a final farewell, as if he was preparing to meet God and wanted to be cleansed of his sins. We all cried, and I thought he would return home al-Hajj, a completely new person. Upon his return, Najla initially saw a transformation in her husband. She said, he told me that being on Hajj reminded him of the Prophet, especially of his deed, how gentle, kind, and loving he was as a husband, father, and neighbor. My husband wanted to be a loving husband just like the Prophet. And he was. He was the perfect husband, never angry, always smiling and speaking gently. However, Najla reflects and asks me, how long do you think this lasted? And she answers her own question, 3 months. After this period, Najla observed that Abu Bakr gradually returned to his previous self, prone to irritation, impatience, and anger. The time immediately after his return, Najla recognized him, however, as truly al-Hajj, spiritually transformed and embodying qualities of piety and devotion. While the initial post-Hajj period marked significant transformation, it was not permanent. Najla emphasized that her husband was not a bad person, but that the pressures of daily life gradually eroded his heightened spiritual state. This case underscores the limitations of pilgrimage as an instrument for lasting change and reflect the ambivalence of everyday life that pilgrims have to deal with upon their return. Abu Bakr's story highlights the importance of studying Islam as a lived religion, where faith is not confined to doctrine or ritual, but also embedded in the everyday experience. Daily life is a continuous process of negotiation and adaptation, and religious experiences reflect personal understandings of faith as well as its ongoing negotiation. Pilgrimage, therefore, must be analyzed not only through its grand moments, but also through its integration into the mundane realities of everyday life. It is ultimately the pilgrims themselves who grapple with this and their own sense of failure and transformation. Some offer different explanations for this change or lack of thereof that follows their Hajj. Others insist that that in a Muslim's life, there are always pathways for ethical improvement that exist independent of the Hajj. Thus, pilgrimage is not necessarily the culmination of moral development, but rather a step of an ongoing process, and for some, even the beginning. For many Moroccans, being a pilgrim or even practicing Muslim more broadly is metaphorically a work in progress, an evolving journey that is shaped by aspirations, moral registers, and complexities of cultural discourses and habitus. Studying the everyday provides valuable insights into how pilgrims fashion themselves within their communities and how pilgrimage weaves itself into the fabric of their daily existence. This process of self-fashioning is neither uniform nor equally accessible to all. Socioeconomic status, age, class, and gender shape how individuals experience and negotiate pilgrimage and everyday life. While pilgrimage is often idealized as a universal religious obligation, in practice, access to the Hajj is mediated through structural constraints and deeply embedded social norms. This is particularly evident in the case of Moroccan women, who must negotiate cultural expectations and financial barriers in ways that differ from their male counterparts. Women often gain cultural prestige associated with the pilgrimage, not necessarily by performing it themselves, but by facilitating the journey of their husbands or other male relatives, like in the case of Najla, who herself didn't perform the Hajj, but helped her husband do so. Historically, only a limited number of women could afford to go to Hajj, with financial resources often coming from affluent fathers or husbands, personal business, or inherited wealth. For women with little or no financial capital, performing the Hajj remains an extraordinary challenge. Lubna, it's another female pilgrim, in her she's a woman in her early 30s, whose story I introduce in chapter 7 offer a glimpse into how gender, class, and social expectations intersect to shape the pilgrimage experience. Growing up in an impoverished urban neighborhood between Muhammadiyah and Casablanca, Lubna assumed familiar responsibilities from an early age. After her father's passing in 2004, she became the primary breadwinner for her mother and 2 younger siblings, working as a daily laborer in a car parts factory while supporting her family. Despite her limited financial means, Lubna cherished a lifelong aspiration to undertake the Hajj, inspired by childhood stories of her great-grandfather's pilgrimage, whom her mother described as having walked on his feet from Morocco to Mecca. In 2015, Lubna's long-held dream of performing the Hajj became financially possible when she won an annual lottery organized by her employer, granting 3 workers a sum of 50,000 dirhams, which is approximately 5,000 US dollars, especially to perform the Hajj. However, as a young unmarried woman, she still faced multiple institutional and social barriers. At the time, Saudi regulations required female pilgrims under 40 to have a male guardian to accompany them to Mecca. This rule was erased a couple of years ago. And like all Moroccans who wished to perform the Hajj, she needed to enter the Qur'a, a lottery system that allows people to win a spot in Morocco's 32,000 pilgrim quota. To navigate those challenges, Lubna turned to her 85-year-old grandfather, who, due to his age, qualified for automatic selection as part of the eldest 15% of applicants. This is another regulation where those who are eldest in Morocco can win a spot in the lottery without having to go through the entire process. So Lubna's uncles pooled resources to fund the grandfather's journey, ensuring that he could accompany her. While Lubna's grandfather's seniority granted him privilege, her gender and age placed her at a disadvantage, underscoring the deeply gendered dynamic of the pilgrimage access. She nonetheless was happy that her grandfather could perform the Hajj because of her before his passing. Having overcome the restrictions imposed on her as a female pilgrim, Lubna successfully completed the Hajj. When I first met her, Lubna had just returned from Mecca. She had expected that, in line with local etiquette, many visitors, including her family members, friends, and neighbors, would come to her house to congratulate her safe return. In the first few days, some family members and close friends did visit her. However, many women from her community refrained from visiting, congratulating her, or acknowledging her pilgrimage. Gossip and social resentment surrounded her decision to retain her lottery prize and perform the Hajj despite being young and financially disadvantaged, disrupting normative expectations. Despite these social challenges, Lubna cultivated new networks through her pilgrimage experience. She shared bonds formed during the Hajj enabled her to extend her social capital beyond her immediate environment. The relationships she established with fellow female pilgrims from Morocco granted her access to different layers of Moroccan society, broadening her social world. These new connections, in turn, compensated for the loss of her former friendships and provided Lubna with alternative sources of support and belonging. Lubna's story is another example of the importance of taking an intersectional approach to studying the Hajj experience and its significance in the lives of Muslims in general. Her journey illustrates how age, class, and gender intersect to shape both physical and social mobility, demonstrating the impact of sociocultural contexts on gendered perspectives and the experience of the Hajj. The constraints and the opportunities that shaped her journey remind us that the Hajj cannot be understood in isolation from the broader structures of power, culture, and history that influence who is able to undertake this sacred rite and how they experience it. pilgrimage is never just about reaching a sacred site. It is a transformative process shared by movement of people, objects, and ideas. And overall, the Hajj does not begin at the moment of arrival in Mecca, nor does it end when pilgrims return home. It remains in the ways people live. They reflect, tell, and retell their experiences, what they bring back with them, the gifts and other objects, and also the songs that they perform in their everyday lives, in weddings and parties, and the stories that they pass to the new generations. I discussed the significance of those, the songs and the stories in chapters 9 and 10 of the book, giving a glimpse into the culture production around the Hajj in Morocco. Therefore, to understand all these dynamics, it is really important to understand it as an ongoing process, as an experience that is negotiated, practiced, and redefined through the daily lives. The ongoing presence of the Hajj in the mundane reinforces what Shilke and Debek describe as the plural and unsystematic nature of religious experience, one that resists rigid categorizations and instead takes shape through lived realities. By foregrounded the lived experiences of pilgrimage, this book seeks to move beyond aspects or abstract discussions of religious duties, instead explore how Muslims practice Islam and how Islam is embedded in practices of the daily life. I hope that the book provides insight into the anthropology of pilgrimage and inspires meaningful conversations about the ways in which Islam is lived in the everyday. I'll stop here, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about pilgrimage in Morocco. Thank you very much. I'll pass the book around if you want to have a look at the chapters.
Thank you, Dr. Kholoud, inshallah. So we'll entertain some questions from the audience, inshallah, and perhaps I have my own questions, but let's give the audience a chance to ask some questions, inshallah.
First, did you take all these pictures yourself?
Yes.
Beautiful, wow.
Thank you.
The pictures are amazing.
Thank you.
And one of the questions that came up for me as you were talking is, I know you do also comparative religion and comparative studies. So, have you thought about comparing the Muslim pilgrimage to, let's say, like pilgrimages in Europe, like to Compostela, and like Catholic pilgrimages that people are making to Medjugorje or Compostela, and what similarities have you found?
Do I answer, or do you want to?
You should just go ahead and answer, and we'll take the next question, inshallah.
Thank you very much. I didn't personally look at other pilgrimages, but I did use them in the cultural, like when I discussed the literature review, because many of the theories that are concentrating on studying the pilgrimage site in terms of communities and contestation are based on Christian pilgrimage sites.
Right.
So there were a few studies that were really fascinating to look at these contestations in pilgrimage. What I did look at is local pilgrimage practices for those who are unable to go to Mecca, and I found those to be really fascinating. So,
where did they go?
So there are a couple of places in Morocco that I studied. One site is called Sidi Shashkal, and the other is called Sidi Boukhayar. One is on the west coast, and one is in the mountains of the Rif, so very different geographically. But they are places where people on the day of Arafat go and they do ritual that is very similar to what pilgrims do in Mecca. So they stand in a certain place, they do communal prayers. And they believe, like among the people that I got to speak to, that if we do this, because we are unable to go to Mecca because of financial or political reasons or other reasons, God will still accept from us, or they hope that God will accept because they go for the same intention. There are also fascinating cases in Indonesia and Sri Lanka and many countries where Muslims and non-Muslims go to perform local pilgrimages for those who are unable to go to Mecca. One case that is really fascinating from Sri Lanka is called Adam's Peak. And it's like the legend is that like it's a place where the legend is that there is Buddha, and Buddha has 2 feet. One is in Sri Lanka in this place, and one is in Mecca. And Buddhists and Muslims go to this shrine to perform prayers, and they believe that if they go there, it's a blessed place.
Wow.
So there are so many really interesting aspects to look at beyond like the Hajj itself,
Right.
but also how people relate other practices to the Hajj. Among them, these practices. But yeah, the Christian and other pilgrimages are also as fascinating.
Wow.
Does anyone have some questions? Actually, I have one
Yes.
sort of theoretical question,
Sure.
but we'll start with the sort of more simpler question. I was, you mentioned the lottery system and the waiting period in which people have to wait for Hajj, and I just,
Yes.
came from China a couple of months ago, and, brothers were telling me that they had to wait 25 years or something like
Correct.
that for the thing, and so I never went from America, but my presumption is that there isn't this waiting period, but I'm not sure for Americans. And I was curious, how does that sort of create a heightened expectation among people who have to wait so long to perform the Hajj, or what sort of, reactions do they get when they have to wait that long? So that's the first question. We'll
Okay.
deal with it one at a time, and I'll ask
Okay.
the next one.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
This is really fascinating because, people would want to go on Hajj but in Morocco, like during my period of research, the quota was 32,000, among whom there is a few thousands that go to the state for the management of the Hajj. So the actual number that takes the Qura or the lottery is about 28,000. However, those who register are around 100,000. So the numbers are very big. On average, people say that they've applied for 5 or 6 times before they got selected. There are the very lucky few that would be selected the very first time, and they all see it, or at least would narrate it from a religious perspective. They would say, when God's call is there, when God thinks it's the right time for me to go to his house, i.e. Mecca, I will go. So they take it from a religious kind of understanding, but still they're very disappointed when they're not selected, obviously. And that's because Morocco manages the Hajj in that way. So the actual management of the Hajj is different in different countries. In Indonesia, for example, it is by year, so it's very similar to what you described. The average waiting time now is about 25 years. So those who would register now have to wait 25 years to go on Hajj. But that also creates a lot of ways to go around the system, let's say. So there's a black market for Hajj visas. And in Morocco, that is that was before the period of my research, but still there are a lot of people scammed. So every single year there are news of people who have been scammed because they have entrusted somebody who said they're well connected, they'll get them Hajj visas through like other means, and they would pay twice, maybe as much as the normal price, and then they would be scammed because this doesn't work. In the past, before 2015, I believe, there was a black market for what they called mujamala visas, and I write a bit about this, where people can go to these kind of brokers in the black market, and these brokers would take the passport and go to countries where the quota is not met, like Libya or Senegal, or like one of these countries where those who register are less in number than the actual quota, and they will get them visas from there. Now, this has become illegal in the past few years, so those who are traveling on a Moroccan passport have to have visas that are issued in Morocco. which makes this kind of illegal practice more difficult to actually do. But there is also what they also call mujamala visa, which is like courtesy or gift visas that are given by the Saudi state to officials in certain Muslim countries. And in Morocco, there was, for example, a big fight in the parliament over 500 visas that came through the Saudi embassy, and everyone wanted them because, you know, they're gift visas, so they're free visas. And there was a big fight in the parliament because everyone wanted them. So in general, I went all around the place to answer about the waiting period. So the waiting period differs, but often people explain it in like, people have to be patient. When time comes, when God wants it, it will eventually happen.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here, and I'll postpone my
Okay.
In the case of the woman in your book that you write about, who won the lottery from her work, but her grandfather was also seeking his visa. Did it help her chances to get a visa if she went with her grandfather as her mahram? Is that why she?
Yeah, that's why she went with the
Okay.
grandfather, because the regulation back then that she needed a male guardian to start with, but also the eldest 15% of all those who register. So during the time I did my field work, so it was people who were 86 or older. So, and to give them a chance, because, you know, no one knows when people will die, but, you know, these are people who are almost there.
She was more likely to get
Yeah.
visa because he
Yes.
was gone.
So he was going because he was like nearly 90. And then because he never been, so also the son saw it as an opportunity. So they put money in so he could go. But in the entire system, she was the companion. It was because those eldest 15%, they're allowed to take a companion each to look after them. So she went as the person to the caretaker almost, but in reality, it was her that made it possible for the grandfather to go. Yeah.
We have another question.
Two questions.
Sure.
I'm wondering if you could talk more about the Hajj and the Moroccan national identity part. And the second question would be, so when people go for Hajj, I'm presuming they're getting exposure to different sorts of the diversity within Islam. So I'm curious as to how does that, I think you talked a little about they become obviously more pious, but how does the exposure to the variety, how does that show up based on that?
Yes, so in the chapter on national identity, I look at three aspects. One is how the state deals with the Hajj. So in Morocco, the king is considered like a descendant of the Prophet, or at least that's the narrative. So he uses this opportunity to consolidate almost his position. So every year at the time of Hajj, there is like a speech that the king makes. And in this speech, there are different aspects that he emphasizes. One of them is that the pilgrims are ambassadors of Morocco. One of them is that they should show the Moroccan identity when they are among the other pilgrims. But also it has things like phrases like my great-grandfather, the Prophet, for example. It is like, because we are descendants of my role as the commander of the faithful. You know, all these kind of aspects that consolidate the religious power, or almost, of the king. So it is like and in the chapter I analyze a few of these speeches that happen every year. And the second aspect is the media. So the media, especially the state media, also uses the Hajj as an opportunity to portray how Moroccans should behave during the Hajj, but also almost always it shows the positive aspects of the Moroccan pilgrimage experience. And the third aspect is pilgrims themselves, how they see themselves as different from the others or distinct. but also how in certain aspects their identity is highlighted because of the way the Hajj is managed. So for example, in Mina, where people have to stay in this tent camp, it is divided by nationality. And Moroccans often complain that their camp is very close to where the garbage is. So during the time I was doing my field work, there was actually demonstrations in Mecca during the Hajj with Moroccan flags and all, because people were complaining about the conditions that they were under. So these were the different aspects where this national identity comes to the fore. But also people, when they come back, they also talk about how they realize they're different because they saw all this diversity. So some of the women would say, oh, I think my husband is handsome now that I saw all these other men. And some people would say, oh, I think Moroccans are fine if they're compared to this X nation, but if they're compared to Indonesians or Malaysians, we're still like backward, because like apparently like Indonesians and Malaysians were recognized by most of those I spoke to as like really exemplary, very nice, very well-mannered. They know how to deal with others. That was like the image that they portrayed. So this was one aspect of the diversity. So like who was better in portraying their Muslim identity in Mecca, but also like some people would come back and say how like they found out that they were diverse in Morocco as well, because some people have never been outside of Morocco. Some people have never been outside of their own city, because it's expensive to travel even within one's own country. So this was really important aspect, because it was a journey of a lifetime. For some people, it was literally the journey of a lifetime, because they haven't traveled before. So they also reflect on that. I hope that answers the question.
I'm just curious, regardless of socioeconomic status, Moroccan citizens have to, if they want to go on Hajj, it has to be by lottery.
Have to be?
By lottery.
Yes. Yeah, so the lottery is because there's a quota for every Muslim country. And so for every Muslim majority country, that is 1 out of 1,000 of the population. So Morocco's population is roughly 32 million. So 32,000 is the number of people who can go. But then more than that actually register. So they have to do a lottery to determine who goes. Different countries like Europe doesn't have a quota yet. So if a person is going from the Netherlands or France, they just register and go. I think the US doesn't have a quota in the same system, which means that people who are going from the US or from Europe have more chance to go. So some Moroccans, for example, who are Dutch Moroccan, they would go from the Netherlands rather than from Morocco.
Another question.
You talked about your parents experiencing the Hajj, and I was wondering if you had gone on Hajj, and how does that influence or inform your analysis?
I've been on Umrah twice during my field work, which is like the minor pilgrimage. I haven't been on Hajj simply because, like every other Muslim, I'll have to go through a lottery system. And in certain countries, like the younger you are, the less the opportunity it is to actually go on Hajj. But it was funny because when I went, like the mahram, the male guardian thing was still going. So I had to take my parents with me because my dad, I had to take my dad. But then my dad wanted to take my mom. And then my mom wanted to take my eldest sister. So we went in a way as a family. But it was really interesting because I could see then a lot of the things that people were talking about, especially the women talking about the restrictions that women have in the Rawda, for example, where the Prophet is buried. Women are allowed only like a couple of hours a day during the day and in certain places. So they're not allowed to reach the tomb of the Prophet, for example. And that was something that almost all the women complained about. So it was really interesting to see it firsthand and see how women were talking about it. Also the places where, how the police and how the guards were managing the entire process was really interesting to see for myself. Yeah, it wasn't Hajj as such, because the Hajj is larger in scale and more rites that happened during the Hajj, but I could say it was really interesting to see, even if it was Umrah.
I have a hila for you.
Yeah?
If you want to go to Hajj.
Okay.
That's what I did on my first Hajj. I
All right.
went and spent 3-4 days on the Jordanian-Saudi border in the desert.
Uh-huh.
And then eventually, just before Arafah, sometimes the emir of the border just opens up the border and you go in.
Wow.
So I was lucky back in 1999, haven't done it that way.
Okay.
So
Well,
I don't know if it's still operational, but it was back then.
I don't know if it's still operational, but I do know that some people would go to Umrah in Ramadan and then hide until the season of Hajj, and then they come out. And actually,
Talk about immigration.
yeah, no, it's fascinating actually, and it's really worth studying.
Wow. No, thank you. This is really so fascinating. I have two questions. One, I'm really interested in this Hajj al-Miskin, this idea of the poor people can go somewhere in Morocco and do certain rituals.
Yeah.
And when they're finished with their rituals, do they trim their hair and do they, as if they've made the Hajj? Do they? Is that?
No.
They
well,
don't.
not that I witnessed, but they do. So, for example, in one of the sites, there is an old well that they call Zamzam, for example. So they drink water from that well.
Wow.
The place where they stand, they call Arafat.
Mm.
There's like a shrine where they go around it, also like imitation of the going around the Kaaba. So there are a few of the rites, but not literally like the Hajj. Yeah, so that they don't do trimming the hair.
That's fascinating. And then the other question I have is, I've encountered people who came back from the Hajj extremely disappointed and extremely dispirited. So, and obviously, I'm sure there's social stigma around sharing your story if everyone else is celebrating and everyone else is talking about what an incredible experience it was, but you had a terrible one.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there like a support group for people in Morocco, where they can share their bad experiences or is it just like a dark secret that they keep in their heart and never share? Is that something that an anthropologist can look at? Is that something?
I can see what people tell me, and then with participant observation, obviously we live with the people, so we see like what they reflect on. I think, well, it's twofold. One is that there is a long history of people who have been to Hajj and tell all these magnificent stories. So there is an aspiration to live up to that kind of idealistic image. So a lot of people who come would speak about these stories, like all of a sudden the pain in my legs went and I was running around with no pain, or I've seen like angels or whatever. Like there are all these magnificent stories. But then to a lesser extent, I think social media specifically have changed that because people can share instantly what is happening with them. So the disappointment really comes not in the stories that they tell when they come back, but instantly when they are on the Hajj. So when they see that their hotel room is not tidy, or they take a picture and they share it almost straight away, or when they see something that they don't like around the Kaaba or people behaving in a certain way. So I think technology in general and new media in particular made that, like the complaining, even like more of a thing. But also I witnessed people hide on because also if you didn't have a good experience, that also is, what's the word? It questions how much of a good person you are. Because then if you're a good person, then you will have a good experience because God would have accepted your Hajj. So it's really connected. And I could share a personal story there where my father got ill during our Umrah. And on our way back, my mother said, don't tell anybody that your dad got ill because then they'll think that something went wrong. So there are these things that people choose to hide because...
You're now telling us.
Yeah, well, I don't mind. Like, I didn't understand. And also, like, these, like, what does it mean? You know, if you don't enjoy it in the same way. For example, a lot of people told me that when they saw the Kaaba for the first time, they cried because they were, like, taken by emotion. But then when I went, I didn't cry. So what does that mean? So there are expectations, really. And I think the period that when people get to kind of reflect and retell the stories, they sometimes deliberately hide some things because they don't want people to judge them.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I hope that answers the question.
It's really interesting because I know that a lot of people would feel like it's a secret.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about, but like, and maybe the things on Hajj that made it not pleasant, maybe it wasn't of their doing. Maybe it was other people's behavior, or like even the protests about being, stationing the Moroccans near the garbage at Mina is like, if there are demonstrations happening during Hajj, then obviously not all aspects of the journey were pleasant for the people who went.
Absolutely. And also sometimes accidents happen. So in 2015 there was a big stampede where nearly 2,000 people were killed.
Yeah.
So people have these also as part of their memories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my other question,
Yes.
actually I have now two, but I'll ask one at this point, and that was, I noticed that you had the sort of reception of the Moroccan immigrants as they come back, and I remember in my time in Syria, and probably it's similar in different parts of Sham as well, where, when the Hajj would come back, the whole neighborhood would sort of have this sort of welcoming back a kind of reception, and they would be playing the drums, and he'd be wearing, or she'd be wearing their sort of abaya, and there'd be the center, and they're sort of drumming and dancing. And I'm just wondering what sort of reception, I mean, we got a sense of the pictures, but if you can just elaborate a little bit more on the sort of ritual that is performed for the Haji. Or Hajjia in Morocco, in contrast to what they do in Sham. I suppose that it changes from one culture to another, and each one of them has a way of celebrating their Hajj.
Well, it's a bit different from one country to the other, obviously, but in most places they are received by their relatives in a very celebratory way, as you mentioned. In Morocco, these pictures are from Casablanca, where people were stationed at the airport, and they do this when the pilgrims leave and also when they return. So when the pilgrims leave, also the family comes and they do a lot of goodbyes and crying and farewell. When they come, it's really interesting because a lot of people, for example, bring dates and milk because that's how Moroccans welcome those who are visiting. And it was really interesting because it's very sensory. So people would, like when the first pilgrim comes out, even those who are not their relatives would go and touch them, for example, because they want to get a glimpse of that barakah from them. And also they, the relatives would start there's this chant that they do in Morocco, almost like a song. So they start singing together to welcome the pilgrims. When they arrive at home, they also would have other people, neighbors and relatives waiting at home. And they would have sweets and tea to share with those who are welcoming them. And obviously for several days after that, people would come and congratulate them. In the villages, it's even more celebratory because less people from the villages can afford to go to Hajj. So in the villages, actually, all the village goes to welcome the pilgrims when they know the day they're arriving, and they would take drums, and they would take, people would dress in their traditional clothes also to welcome the pilgrims. But it's different in different places, but it's also very, a big celebration often.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess I can ask my other question, which is a little bit more technical. You mentioned Victor Turner's notions of liminality and communitas in reference to rituals like al-Hajj. And I'm wondering if you could sort of draw out that dynamic in terms of the notions of within those concepts of liminality and communitas of Hajj, and how it reinforces the social embeddedness that you were talking about in your book of Hajj in Moroccan society.
So I think if I understand the question, it's more about the everyday life is a bit different from the liminal
from the
phase.
liminality of something like Hajj.
Yeah.
Yes,
So what I try to say is that
and
there
how
is.
do they sort of, at what point do they converge to produce a certain dynamic in the community? I guess?
So the liminality actually, I would say in the past was more obvious than it is today, because in the past people would actually be separated from their community. So they'll do like the farewell, they'll travel to Mecca, there will almost be no contact of that everyday life that they have before they've left to Mecca. And actually at a certain point, like before the 20th century, people would be absent for months from their families. Today, it's harder to think of a complete separation because people are still connected, even if they are physically away.
With the social media.
With social media, with communication with family, with even the normal media. They know what is happening around the world, even if they're on Hajj. But at the same time, they still do these rituals that are of separation. So before going on Hajj in Morocco, for example, they do something called musamaha. So the pilgrim will go to anybody who they had dispute with to finish the dispute. They would go to relatives and ask for their forgiveness because they deal with it as death. So if somebody is dying, they have to settle all their daily kind of problems and also these issues that they have with their community. So there is that separation still exists. They do have like ceremonies. Some of them do a walima, so they would invite the relatives. They do a formal goodbye. They'll ask people if they want them to do specific prayers for them when they are in Mecca. So there is that separation, and there is like the aspect of communitas when they are on the pilgrimage itself, but it's much harder to speak of complete separation today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kholoud.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for all this coming out, inshallah.
And please, I'll leave the book. I'll leave the book here. So if anyone wants to read it, you can borrow it from the library of the college. Thank you. No, thank you. I'm really grateful and very happy to meet you all.
Thank you.
When was the book published?
Last year, 2014.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Amazing, mashallah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I'll take this out.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and
And Omer.
I want to hold your book.
Okay. Where do you want to do it? Over here?
You should be in the middle, though.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's front.
Okay.
Does it have yeah. It just has an American Islamic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't back up any further or you'll be out the window. Yes. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Shukran jazilan.
It's amazing to me that how restricted the world is to other countries. How fortunate we are as Americans to have access to internet. The majority of Americans don't even have a passport.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But
The majority of our Congress people don't have passports.
Yeah.
It's scary. Yeah.
No, but I was telling Dr. Omer, it's a huge country. So if people want to see the mountains, they can. If they want to see the desert, they can. So it's understandable why people don't travel much.
Yeah.
To me at least.
Well,
Like, I don't know.
we also live in a bubble mentally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
just the fear of xenophobia and the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
But if the current politics continue, it may be that they'll greatly restrict Americans.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
That will be very small.
Yeah.
We'll have to go through background checks before they allow us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way to treat.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Shukran. Shukran.
That's great. Inshallah, it was a very engaging talk.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Obviously,
I hope they
you have a
find
passion.
it.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. There's a very passion of your, with your subject matter.
Oh, yeah.
It would really show. It really came out.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had done my first hajj because I was studying in Syria, and I heard that and of course at that time, a student I couldn't afford. They already began to implement the $5,000, $10,000. Back then it was
And where did
$5,000, $10,000.
you stay?
I was in when I was there.
Yeah.
I ended up just because I was not a part of the organized hajj. So it was a whole medley of things, whether it was, ended up staying in sort of like different groups that had housing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And staying
Like
there.
apartments.
Apartments, yeah. Some of them had these kind of things, and just there.
Yeah.
And but it was it was interesting. But I
Have you
didn't go
been?
through that process. So.
Have you been since?
Yeah, I went after that, more formally,
Yeah.
and that also was kind of also interesting because I got almost scammed as well, but
Oh gosh.
found a way to get around it.
Yeah.
Inshallah, so I did go again, but the first time was just going on the border, and actually they didn't let everybody in, but they did let 31.
Yeah.
And me and my two fellows who are from Britain were able to get through. 31 Chechens didn't show up to the border. They were ready to close it,
Okay.
and they were like, okay, you guys can replace 31. And the rest of the 5,000 or whatever, they didn't get in that year. But the year before they did. It's just that so in Jordan, at that point in time, in the late 90s, everybody was they had this thing about expecting there's something called the Emir of the border, who's of that province. If he says open up, this will be at the last, just so they can catch Arafah. And so you just jump on a bus from what's the name? The one that's with Jordan. It's the one that the crossing for Jordan into Saudi is the sea. It's known as I forget the name of it.
I can't remember either, but I know where you mean, because we also go by that.
Yeah. Inshallah, but so that's all.
Alhamdulillah, you did it. You made it.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank
tonight.
you.
It was really fascinating.
Oh,
I
thank
look
you
forward to
very
reading your
much.
book. I really do.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah.
And it's lovely meeting you.
No, lovely meeting you. Let me give you a card.
Thank you.
And and how long will you be in Boston?
2 weeks. Well, if you ever come back to Palestine as well, please let me know. For long, Okay. Sounds good. I won't. Thank you. Do you want to leave this
Yeah, they're gonna eventually probably need them for. Do you want to take some or something?
No, I'll take one, but I know you need it for tomorrow or?
Yeah, it's around this.
Well, I'm staying with a friend of a friend.
AIC.
The hotels you recommended looked amazing, but way beyond my budget. But I don't know, but luckily, I emailed a friend who's in South Boston and ended up coming to Chicago. And then she said, oh, I have a